trial which is now about to begin is unique in the history of the jurisprudence of the world.
At the heart of the Nuremberg Trial is the Allies' determination to stamp out the political ideology that had taken over Germany in the 1930s, Nazism.
Und für dieses Volk und dieses Volk wollen wir ringen und wollen wir kämpfen.
Hitler's aims were simple and brutal. First, to take total control of Germany.
The people will understand what you, my Führer, mean to Germany. You are Germany. When you act, the nation acts.
Second, to construct a racially pure nation by purging the country of its ethnic and political minorities.
Germans, liberate yourself from the tyranny of the Jews.
And third, to lead Germany through war to world domination and to seize living space for the so-called master race. Hitler proclaimed his dream of a 1,000-year German Reich from this spot, in front of hundreds of thousands of party members assembled in rigid formation in this vast field outside Nuremberg. And it was here, in 1935, that the infamous Nuremberg laws were promulgated. Those laws denied Jews their civil rights, provided for the seizure of their property, and paved the way for the Holocaust. But Adolf Hitler's twisted dreams for Germany turned to dust in the Allied bombing campaigns of the Second World War. At war's end, Nuremberg is destroyed. Much of Europe lies in ruins. August 1945. In London, representatives of the nations that defeated Hitler gathered to decide the fate of surviving Nazi leaders.
There was a great debate before the trial started. Beginning, I think, even before the end of the war. Yes, definitely before the end of the war. About what sort of trial you should have. You could have said the people who committed these murders are murderers and they should be tried and condemned. There was another view, and the other view was that this was a great opportunity to do more.
The Americans say a trial will extend the rule of international law, their only hope to end war forever, and will show the world how civilized people must behave. They will give the defendants what the Nazis never gave their victims, justice in a court of law. Eventually, the Allies put their signatures on a charter, creating a court and laws that will be used to bring Hitler's henchmen to justice. The Germans say the court is nothing but a sham, victor's justice. The Nazi leaders will be tried in a court and under laws which did not exist when their crimes were committed. They say justice ex post facto is no justice at all. Otto Kranzbühler was a leading defense attorney at Nuremberg.
They have tried to bring matters before the court who can never be decided by a court.
This courthouse in symbolic Nuremberg is chosen as the site of the trial. From among the many top Nazis now in captivity, the Allies select the men who will answer for Germany's crimes. Hitler is dead. His two top decision-makers, Heinrich Himmler and Joseph Goebbels, have also committed suicide. But Hermann Göring, Hitler's second-in-command, has been taken alive. Göring created the Gestapo, Hitler's dreaded secret police, and the concentration camps. He is now seriously overweight and addicted to codeine. Rudolf Hess was one of the Nazi Party's first members and stood by Hitler throughout the 1930s. In a bizarre incident, he flew to Scotland in 1941 and spent the rest of the war in a British prison. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, a lawyer and a top official of the SS, carried out orders to liquidate 6 million Jews. Admiral Karl Dönitz led the German Navy and is suspected of ordering the deaths of Allied sailors. Hjalmar Schacht used his knowledge and prestige as one of Europe's top economists to help finance Hitler's rise to power. Walter Funk succeeded him both as Germany's Minister of Economics and as head of the National Bank. Fritz Sauckel ran the organization that rounded up millions of slaves for Germany's factories. Albert Speer is an attractive young architect who became Hitler's confidant and rose to head Germany's war production. In all, the Allies named 24 defendants.
The big names of Hitler's Third Reich are kept under heavy guard.
They're housed in the prison attached to the Nuremberg courthouse. Security is tight, but 1 month before the trial is to begin, the prisoner in cell 9, Robert Lai, Hitler's corrupt labor boss, hangs himself. Security is tightened. One defendant, the industrialist Gustav Krupp, is too ill to stand trial. Another, Martin Bormann, Hitler's powerful secretary, cannot be found. He will be tried in absentia. It was here, 5 months after the German surrender, that the international prosecutors issued their indictments. Their charges were broad, bold, and uncompromising. The defendants are charged on 4 counts: conspiracy to wage aggressive war, crimes against peace, war crimes, and the charge for which Nuremberg will be known 50 years later, crimes against humanity. The world watches as 21 Nazi leaders face their victors in a court of law. Drexel Sprecher, a young American prosecutor, was in the audience.
As I saw them coming in there, I could hardly really believe it's finally happening. And I must say, tears came to my eyes.
The 100-page indictment is read. Then, presiding judge Sir Geoffrey Lawrence turns to the prisoners in the dock.
I will now call upon the defendants to plead guilty or not guilty to the charges against them. Hermann Wilhelm Göring.
Göring, once Hitler's flashy right-hand man, tries to grab the spotlight by making a speech.
Bevor ich die Frage des Gerichtshofes
Before I answer the question of the tribunal whether or not I am guilty,
I informed the court that defendants were not entitled to make a statement. You must plead guilty or not guilty.
I declare myself, in the sense of the indictment, not guilty.
Rudolf Hess.
All of the former Nazi leaders plead not guilty.
No. I declare myself not guilty.
nicht schuldig.
Not guilty. Not guilty.
I will now call upon the chief prosecutor for the United States of America.
Justice Robert Jackson is the moving force behind this trial and has taken a leave of absence from the United States Supreme Court to try the case. He is convinced this is a unique opportunity
To bring to a just judgment those who have thought it safe to wage aggressive and ruthless war.
Jackson considers this opening statement the most important job of his life.
The privilege of opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated.
From now on, says Jackson, the men who lead criminal governments must be held responsible for their crimes.
In the prisoner's dock sit 20-odd broken men, reproached by the humiliation of those they have led almost as bitterly as by the desolation of those they have attacked. Their personal capacity for evil is forever past. Merely as individuals, their fate is of little consequence to the world. What makes this inquest significant is that these prisoners represent sinister influences that will lurk in the world long after their bodies have returned to dust.
Jackson's eloquence commands the courtroom and the world.
Nobody in what we were doing had ever in my ability seen anything as good as his.
Captured Nazi film and documents will form the backbone of Jackson's case.
Close on the heels of the advancing armies followed teams organized to search for enemy documents.
1 week into the trial, U.S. prosecutors shock the audience with their most compelling evidence.
Prosecution for the United States will at this time present to the tribunal, with its permission, a documentary film on concentration camps.
These are the locations of the largest concentration and prison camps maintained throughout Germany and occupied Europe under the Nazi regime.
The 4th Armored Division of General Patton's 3rd Army liberated this camp early in April. When questioned, most of these men could not remember when they'd last eaten a decent meal. Many had been beaten and tortured so long their minds had failed. Some were too far gone when the Americans took over. The slave labor camp at Nordhausen, liberated by the 3rd Armored Division, 1st Army. At least 3,000 political prisoners died here at the brutal hands of SS troops and pardoned German criminals who were the camp guards. Nordhausen had been a depository for slaves found unfit for work in the underground V-bomb plants and in other German camps and factories. Amid the corpses are human skeletons too weak to move. Pictorial evidence of the almost unprecedented crimes perpetrated by the Nazis at the Buchenwald concentration camp. Nationalities and prison numbers are tattooed on the stomachs of the inmates. In the official report, the Buchenwald camp is termed an extermination factory. Bodies stacked one upon the other were found outside the crematory. The body disposal plant. Inside are the ovens which gave the crematorium a maximum disposal capacity of about 400 bodies per 10-hour day.
Dachau, near München, one of the oldest of the Nazi prison camps. The Nazis said it was a prison for political dissenters, habitual criminals, and religious enthusiasts. This is what the liberators found inside the buildings. Hanging in orderly rows were the clothes of prisoners who had been suffocated in a lethal gas chamber. They had been persuaded to remove their clothing under the pretext of taking a shower, for which towels and soap were provided. Sanitary conditions were so appalling that heavy equipment had to be brought in to speed the work of cleaning up.
This is the first film of Nazi atrocities to be seen by many in the audience, and it stuns the courtroom. Some weep, one woman faints.
Die Partei ist Hitler! Hitler aber ist Deutschland, wie Deutschland Hitler ist! Hitler siegt!
One of the defendants, Rudolf Hess, says he should not be tried, claiming he has amnesia and remembers nothing about his role as a Nazi leader.
Oh, Hess was nuttier than a fruitcake, no doubt about it.
Hess was Hitler's loyal and powerful sidekick during the 1920s and 30s.
Is it not consistent with all the medical opinions that the defendant is capable of understanding the course of the proceedings?
Herr Vorsitzender, Mr. President, it is true that the experts consider the defendant Hess capable of following the proceedings. But, on the other hand, in answer to the questions put to them, they emphasize that the defendant is not capable of defending himself.
Suddenly, Hess changes his tune, surprising even his own attorney.
Herr Präsident, ich habe gleich zu
Mr. President, I would like to say this. Henceforth, my memory will again respond to the outside world. The reason for simulating loss of memory were of a tactical nature. I also simulated loss of memory in consultations with my officially appointed defense counsel.
The judges decide that Hess is fit to stand trial. For 6 weeks, the Americans will present evidence, mostly documents, on count 1, the conspiracy to wage an aggressive war. The British take count 2, actually waging war. Sir Hartley Shawcross, the British Attorney General, leads their prosecution team.
Here was aggression, naked and unashamed, which was to arouse the horrified and heroic resistance of all civilized peoples, but which, before it was finished, was to tear down much of the structure of our civilization.
It was novel, of course. There'd never been a trial of that formal kind before.
It takes the British just 4 days to read a list of broken treaties and to describe Hitler's invasions.
The German troops move into Bohemia, Moravia. The occupation goes per schedule in spite of icy roads and a heavy snowstorm.
The Americans then show another film, The Nazi Plan, to prove the Nazis had a plan, a conspiracy to wage an aggressive war. It was compiled from the Nazis' own propaganda films and documents Hitler's rise to power. The growth of anti-Semitism.
Germans boycott. Don't buy in Jewish stores.
The plan to build up Germany's military and take over all of Europe. It takes an inside look at the Nazi government, including a kangaroo court, which the Nazis called the People's Court, that tried the conspirators who attempted to assassinate Hitler in July of 1944.
Yes or no, I want a clear answer. No? You could not even break down because you are but a measly little pile of filth which has lost all self-respect.
War crimes and crimes against humanity, for which Nuremberg is known today, counts 3 and 4, are presented by the Soviet Union and France. Marie-Claude Vaillant-Couturier was a photojournalist who was shipped to Auschwitz for resisting Nazi rule.
We then witnessed heartrending scenes. Old couples forced apart from each other. Mothers made to abandon their young daughters since the latter were sent to the camp, whereas mothers and children were sent to the gas chambers. All these people were unaware of the fate that awaited them. They were merely upset at being separated, but they did not know that they were going to their death. One night we were awakened by terrifying cries, and we discovered on the following day from the men working in the Sonderkommando, the gas commando, that on the previous day the gas supply had run out and they had thrown the children into the furnaces alive.
The Nazis' war against the Soviet Union was fought at a horrifying cost. 20 million Soviets died there. To the Soviet Union, this trial is not about extending the rule of law. It is about vengeance.
I now submit to the tribunal the samples of semi-tanned human skin. Experiments on tanning human skin were still incomplete, and only the victorious advance of the Red Army put an end to this new crime of the Nazis.
The Soviets also used captured film as evidence. This one was found in the home of a Nazi officer in Stuttgart. Despite the damage, it is a shocking testament to Nazi barbarity. The Soviets then show film of liberated concentration camps. Theirs is called Atrocities of the German Fascist Aggressors.
The ovens were burning constantly, reaching temperatures of 1,500 degrees. To burn many corpses at a time, the limbs were cut off. The penetrating smell of burned human flesh lingered continuously above the death camp. Altogether, 1,380,000 corpses were burned to ashes at this site. The ashes and the charred human bones were mixed with manure and used as fertilizer for the vegetable gardens of the Gestapo camp. Entire storehouses were found filled with the victims' possessions. 820,000 pairs of shoes were counted in one single pile alone in the vicinity of the crematorium. Even children's toys and dolls were appropriated by the executioners. All things were carefully sorted and packed to be sent to Germany. The most terrible of all was Auschwitz. 4 million people were murdered in Auschwitz. The camp completely met its quota. Fascist executioners with medical diplomas. The camp doctors, Dr. Schmid and Dr. Mengele, each had devised his own experiment. The only survivors seen here are twins. They don't know their names. They don't know their families. Only numbers are burned into children's arms.
This is the last remaining cell block in the old prison in Nuremberg. For more than a year, this was the home of the Nuremberg defendants. Goering, Speer, Hess, and the others, isolated from each other, one to a cell, waited every day for the call from the American jailers as the trial wore on. The Nuremberg courtroom is packed as the first defendant, Hermann Goering, takes the stand. Goering is the top surviving Nazi, a hero of the First World War. He flew with Baron von Richthofen's Flying Aces, whose early affiliation with the Nazis had given the party a boost. Goering was dedicated to Hitler and to power.
Right from the beginning, we had discussed whether Hitler would and should take over the position of head of the state and whether I should take over the chancellorship.
As soon as the Nazis won the 1933 election that brought Hitler and his National Socialist or Nazi party to power, an event they call a revolution, Goering built up the Gestapo and created the concentration camps.
Of course, in the beginning there were excesses, of course. The innocent were also hurt, here or there. Of course there were beatings here and there, and acts of brutality were committed, but compared to all that has happened in the past and to the greatness of the events, this German revolution of freedom is the least bloody and the most disciplined of all revolutions known to history.
Here was one of the architects and certainly one of the principal lieutenants of Hitler's in getting and carrying out the precepts of Nazism. And yet, somehow or other, he had charisma.
Do the chief prosecutors wish to cross-examine?
Cross-examination of the wily and intelligent Hermann Goering is the most anticipated moment of the trial. But it's clear from Goering's first response that it's he and not Jackson who is in control.
When you met Hitler, as I understand your testimony, you found a man with a serious and definite aim, as you said, in that he was not content with the defeat of Germany in the previous war and was not content with the Versailles Treaty.
I stated that it had struck me that Hitler had very definite views of the impotency of protest. Secondly, that he was of the opinion that Germany must be freed from the Treaty of Versailles. It was not only Adolf Hitler, every patriotic German had the same feelings.
Goering really went on for almost 3 days saying, here's how in the future you can avoid the mistakes we made and achieve the same objectives we were after.
This is a battle of wits, a battle that Jackson loses. Goering repeatedly goads Jackson until he loses his temper before the entire court.
But this witness, seems to me, is adopting and has adopted in the dock and in the stand an arrogant and contemptuous attitude toward this tribunal, which is giving him the trial that he never gave another living soul, or dead ones either. I trust the court is not unaware that outside of this courtroom is a great social question of the revival of Nazism, and that one of the purposes here of the defendant Goering, I think he'd be the first to admit, is to revive and perpetuate it. by propaganda from this trial table if possible.
David Maxwell Fyfe, the former Attorney General of Great Britain and an experienced criminal lawyer, does a better job of controlling the witness.
The Führer, at any rate, must have had full knowledge of what was happening with regard to concentration camps, the treatment of the Jews and the treatment of the people who were working, mustn't he?
I already mentioned it as my opinion that the Führer did not know about details in concentration camps, about atrocities as described here. As far as I know him, I do not believe he was informed. But insofar as
I'm not asking about details, I'm asking about the murder of 4 or 5 million people. Are you suggesting that nobody in power in Germany, except Himmler and perhaps Kaltenbrunner, knew about that?
I am still of the opinion that the Führer did not know about these figures.
I asked you about an order to kill all inmates at Mauthausen concentration camp shortly before the end of the war. Who was responsible for that order? Were you?
Nein. Ernst Kaltenbrunner is the highest-ranking surviving officer of the SS, which carried out the murder of 6 million Jews. Despite a mountain of evidence against him, Kaltenbrunner denies his guilt.
I consider the statement that I ever saw a gas chamber, either in operation or at any other time, wrong and incorrect.
Prosecutor John Amon continues his cross-examination.
You had no personal knowledge of and did nothing personal about the program for the extermination of the Jews. Is that correct? Except to oppose it.
No, except that I was against it. From the moment I knew of this as a fact and had convinced myself of it, I raised objections with Hitler and Himmler, and the final result was that they were stopped.
Inexplicably, except for incompetence, Kaltenbrunner's lawyer had called Rudolf Huss, the commandant of Auschwitz, to testify that Kaltenbrunner never visited that death camp. But his testimony, read here by Prosecutor John Amon, does nothing for the defense.
I commanded Auschwitz until 1 December 43 and estimate that at least 2,500,000 victims were executed and exterminated there by gassing and burning, and at least another 500,000 succumbed to starvation and disease, making a total dead of about 3 million.
Huss has the dubious distinction of being the first to use Cyclone B, a pesticide, to kill human beings.
It took from 3 to 15 minutes to kill the people in the death chamber. We knew when the people were dead because their screaming stopped.
Testimony by witness Rudolf Huss only strengthens the case against defendant Kaltenbrunner. Despite Kaltenbrunner's denials, the case against him is easy to prove. The case against Hitler's Navy commander, Admiral Karl Dönitz, is far more difficult. Dönitz is charged with war crimes for ordering his men not to rescue shipwrecked enemy sailors. His defense is simple. The order was made out of military necessity.
The powerful Anglo-American Air Force was patrolling everywhere and in increasingly large numbers. From the summer of 1942, that is a few months before September, when this order was issued, the losses of our U-boats through air attacks rose suddenly by more than 300%.
Dönitz's lawyer, Otto Kronzbühler, is a young naval officer who is considered the best defense lawyer at the trial. His strategy is to show that Dönitz and American admirals had issued similar orders. To do that, he sends interrogatories to Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, and reads Nimitz's answers into the record.
On general principles, the United States submarines did not rescue enemy survivors. If undue additional hazard to the submarine resulted.
Of course, it was a big success to have it answered the way it was.
Were you surprised at the way Admiral Nimitz answered?
No, no. I expected it. Any admiral in the Navy would have done the same.
On cross-examination, David Maxwell Fyfe questions Dönitz about a related order to shoot prisoners of war.
Now you have this final opportunity of answering that question. Will you answer it or won't you?
Ja, das will ich tun. Ich halte das für möglich, zumal der Jurist hier dieser Ansicht ist.
Yes, I will do that. I do not know if it is correct because I did not issue the order.
Maxwell Fyfe then reads from a document on the use of slave labor to build submarines, for which Dönitz is charged with crimes against humanity.
12,000 concentration camp prisoners will be employed in the shipyards as additional labor. Now that is your document. So may we take it that you were familiar with the fact of the existence of concentration camps?
I have never denied it.
From whom did you learn that? Answer, the whole German people knew that. Do you remember saying that?
Richtig, ja. Das deutsche Volk.
The German people knew that concentration camps existed, but they did not know anything about the conditions and methods therein.
Not every defendant had been a military leader or in the direct line of command for atrocities committed by Hitler's regime.
Now, Dr. Schock, at the time the Nazis seized power, you had a worldwide acquaintance and very great standing as a leading banker in Germany and in the world, did you not?
Hjalmar Schacht was Hitler's chief economic advisor until he fell out of favor in 1938. He is accused of using his skill and connections to promote an evil regime. Schacht was succeeded by Walter Funk as Hitler's top economic advisor and head of the Reichsbank, the national bank. He is charged on all 4 counts. He is accused of using the Reichsbank to launder valuables taken from concentration camp victims.
When did you start to do business with the SS, Mr. Funk?
Ein Geschäft mit der SS? Business with the SS? I have never done that.
Well, now, let's see. You were not ordinarily in the habit in the Reichsbank of accepting jewels, eyeglass spectacles, watches, cigarette cases, pearls, diamonds, gold dentures, were you? Did you ordinarily accept that sort of material for deposit in your bank?
If that happened, then the Reichsbank committed an illegal act. The Reichsbank was not authorized to do that.
Fritz Sauckel is a boorish functionary who ran Hitler's slave labor program. His boss was the personable and sophisticated Albert Speer. Both are charged on all 4 counts.
Now comes the remark on which I want you to comment. You answered, of the 5 million foreign workers who came to Germany, less than 200,000 came voluntarily.
This proportion, which is put down here by the stenographer or the man writing the records, is quite impossible. How that error occurred, I do not know. I never saw that record.
Despite Sauckel's denials, some 5 million foreign captives were eventually forced to work in Germany's wartime factories. They were housed in concentration camps and worked until they dropped from starvation or illness.
Were you responsible to the defendant Speer, Minister for Armaments and Munitions, for the carrying out of your task?
I had instructions from the Führer to meet the requirements of Reichsminister Speer as far as it was possible for me to do so.
Speer entered Hitler's inner circle as the Führer's personal architect and was said to be Hitler's one true friend. He was given the job of maximizing German war production.
I had 12 million workers working for me.
Then, Speer shocks the courtroom by doing what no other defendant has done.
I should like to say something of fundamental importance here. This war has brought an inconceivable catastrophe upon the German people and indeed started a world catastrophe. Therefore, it is my unquestionable duty to assume my share of responsibility for this disaster before the German people.
By denouncing Hitler, Speer makes points with the judges. On cross-examination, Robert Jackson reads a description of the abysmal condition of slave workers in an airplane factory.
Although the prisoners were completely undernourished, their work was very heavy physically. The prisoners were often maltreated at their work benches by Nazi overseers and female SS guards. It often happened that individual women or girls had to be carried back to camp by their comrades owing to exhaustion.
Speer responds to Jackson's accusations.
I refuse to evade responsibility, but the conditions were not what they are said to have been here.
After 9 months of testimony, Robert Jackson begins the prosecution's closing arguments.
The large and varied role of Goering was half militarist and half gangster. He stuck a pudgy finger in every pie. He used his SA muscle men to help bring the gang into power. The zealot Hess, before succumbing to wanderlust, was the engineer tending the party machinery. Minister of Economics Funk accelerated the pace of rearmament, and as Reichsbank president, banked for the SS, the gold teeth filling of concentration camp victims, probably the most ghoulish collateral in banking history.
Sir Hartley Shawcross says death is the only fit punishment for all of the defendants.
12 million men, women and children have died thus, murdered in cold blood. What rights has any man to mercy who has played a part in such a crime?
The French and Soviets also seek death.
This is a crime so monstrous, so undreamt of in history throughout the Christian era up to the birth of Hitlerism, that the term genocide has had to be coined to define it.
After summaries by the 22 defense teams, the defendants are given a chance to speak. Hermann Goering insists he did nothing wrong.
I did not want a war, nor did I bring it about. I did everything to prevent it by negotiations.
Surprisingly, Wilhelm Keitel, Hitler's military chief of staff, long considered a coward, is one of the few to accept responsibility for his crimes.
It's tragic to have to realize that the best I had to give as a soldier, obedience and loyalty, was exploited for purposes which could not be recognized at the time, and that I did not see that there is a limit set even for a soldier's performance of his duty.
Albert Speer says just what the Allies, especially the Americans, want to hear. The United States wants to see Germany rise again as a bulwark against communism.
After this trial, the German people will despise and condemn Hitler as the proven author of its misfortune. A new large-scale war will end with the destruction of human culture and civilization. Therefore, this trial must contribute towards preventing such degenerate wars in the future and towards establishing rules whereby human beings can live together.
The judges retire for a month of deliberations. On the morning of October 1st, 1946, they read their verdicts.
The tribunal finds the defendant Goering guilty on all 4 counts of the indictment.
Goering is convicted of conspiracy, waging aggressive war, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The Soviet judge, Jan Nikitchenko, reads next.
The tribunal finds the defendant Hess guilty on counts 1 and 2, and not guilty on counts 3 and 4.
The verdicts continue. Kaltenbrunner, guilty. Dönitz, guilty. Funk, guilty. Then banker Hjalmar Schacht.
The tribunal finds that Schacht is not guilty on this indictment and directs that he shall be discharged by the marshal when the tribunal presently adjourns.
Zaukel and Speer are also found guilty. In all, 6 defendants are convicted on all 4 of the charges. 13 are convicted on some charges, and 3 are acquitted.
It was a decent, proper trial. The defendants were allowed to speak. They were allowed to have counsel. They had access to the documents that were produced, and so on.
The sentences are read.
Defendant Hermann Wilhelm Goering, The International Military Tribunal sentences you to death by hanging.
Then Rudolf Hess.
The tribunal sentences you to imprisonment for life. Ernst Kaltenbrunner to death by hanging. Walter Funk to imprisonment for life. And Karl Dönitz to 10 years imprisonment. Fritz Saukel put to death by hanging. Albert Speer to 20 years imprisonment.
12 men are condemned to die. 7 will serve time in prison. Otto Kranzbühler reflects on the disparity in the sentencing of Fritz Saukel, who procured slave labor for Germany and was sentenced to death, and his boss, Albert Speer, who got 20 years.
Speer, in some way, was a gentleman, and Saukel was not. And that made a difference.
After the verdicts, the 21 men are led back to their cells. In a final act of defiance, Goering cheats the hangman by taking cyanide hours before the executions are to begin. The grisly work takes just an hour and a half.
Was there at all justice done at Nuremberg?
In my opinion, no. Justice cannot be done partly.
Kranzbühler shares the views of many Germans of his generation. He says justice could have been achieved only if the defendants had been tried under German law.
It was occupation law for the defeat. And that's why it can never be, will not be a president.
Sadly, the convictions for waging aggressive war did not set a precedent. Millions have died in hundreds of wars since they were handed down. But today, the trial that ended World War II stands for humanitarian principles that are evoked by one word: Nuremberg.
I would say it stands for the top people not getting away with it.
If orders are given which are clearly illegal, then the soldier must disobey his orders.
Stands as a full testament of the horrors of Nazism.
This is where it ended. This is where the ashes of the executed Nazis and Goering's ashes were scattered into the Isar River in Munich in a final act of retribution by the Allied powers. The Germans were not told of this place. The Americans forgot it. But 50 years later, a question lingers in the air. Was what happened here an end or a beginning? For the millions of victims of war crimes and atrocities around the world since Nuremberg, that question cries out for an answer.